Entitled mother insists I give her my house because my sister is pregnant. I'm a 31-year-old man with a 28-year-old sister who has always been the golden child in my mother's eyes. Growing up, it was clear to me that my mother favored my sister, though my father didn't share that sentiment. My parents divorced when I was a teenager, and the reason was something I wish I could forget. My mother had cheated on my dad with an old high school boyfriend. From as far back as I can remember, she was controlling, manipulative, and narcissistic. And unfortunately, my sister turned out to be just like her, a little mini version of our mother. My mother always believed she had complete authority over me. The moment she snapped her fingers, I was expected to jump, as if I were some obedient dog. It was humiliating, and of course, my sister would back her up every time. So, it wasn't much of a surprise when I chose to live with my dad full-time after the divorce, while my sister stayed with our mom. The two of them were inseparable, and they pretty much cut off all contact with my father, only speaking to him when they needed money. In contrast, I took after my dad. He was a business-oriented man, and he started teaching me the ropes of his work as soon as I turned 16. I got pretty good at it, and after 12 years of working alongside him, he made me a partner in his company. Life was going well for me, but then tragedy struck about 8 months ago. My father, a heavy smoker for most of his life, had become somewhat immunocompromised. When he caught COVID-19, it was too much for his body to handle, and he passed away at just 60 years old. That was the first time I had seen my mother and sister in years. We held a socially distanced funeral for my dad over a video call. By his own request, my father was cremated and buried in a local cemetery, so there was no body or casket to mourn over. My sister seemed to grieve, but my mother, well, she looked indifferent the entire time. It didn't surprise me, though. The last time she had seen my father, she had screamed at him that he owed her more money and even threatened to sue him. I still remember the way my dad laughed at her when she made that threat. My dad had always fulfilled his legal obligations. He paid alimony and child support for as long as he was required to, and not a penny more. He even contributed $30,000 toward my sister's college fund. But after 10 years, the judge ruled that he no longer had to send money to my mom. And honestly, she wasn't struggling financially. She's been working the same job for nearly 3 decades, fully owns the old family home, and even rents out 2 of the rooms on Airbnb regularly. She's far from hurting for money. After the funeral, my dad's will was read. It turns out he had anticipated that if his heavy smoking didn't eventually catch up with him, something else would, and he even joked about it in a pre-recorded video. He left almost everything to me. All of his assets, most of his money, his business, and his home. My sister got a car, a 2015 Nissan Altima, and about $10,000 in cash. As for my mother, she received $1,000 and a few other items she'd been insisting were rightfully hers since the divorce. Beyond that, the rest was mine. My girlfriend and I now live together in the house my father passed down to me. As for my sister, after finishing 2 years of community college, she mostly lived off her boyfriend, only working part-time online for several years. During that time, she got pregnant, but suffered a traumatic miscarriage. I wasn't even aware of it until after the funeral because we were practically no contact and no one else bothered to tell me. Then, when the lockdown hit, her boyfriend's job started downsizing bit by bit until he was only able to stay on part-time. This took a toll on their finances, and he finally told her she needed to find better employment as he was trying to secure a second job himself. And then, she got pregnant again. She claims that she and her boyfriend were careful, but they're calling it her miracle baby. One evening, there was an unexpected knock at my door. When I answered, I was unpleasantly greeted by both my mother and my sister. Without even asking, they both walked right in and made themselves comfortable in my living room. My girlfriend and I exchanged confused glances, and I asked them why they had come by. My sister was giggling, looking all around, and opening doors as if she was giving herself a tour of my home. My mother, on the other hand, had just plopped herself down on the sofa and snapped her fingers, demanding a cold bottled water. My girlfriend, trying to be polite, got the water for her, and I asked again what they were doing here. My sister, seemingly all giddy, ignored me and continued snooping around the house. Before long, I heard her yell from down the hall, "Mommy, it's perfect!" Yes, she still calls her mommy. Finally, my mother spoke up. "Well, I think it's time you did your brotherly duty," she said. I just stood there, baffled, and asked, "What?" My mother proceeded to explain, "Now that your father has passed, this house should have gone to me since I was his only spouse. But you can still fix this. You make plenty of money, and you could just buy a new house. Your sister needs this one so much more since she's the one with a baby on the way. But if you're determined to stay, you could just keep to one room and cover all the bills until you decide to move out." My girlfriend and I have read enough Reddit to know exactly where this was heading and how it would play out if we let it go on. So, I guess you could say we were mentally prepared. I took a deep breath and stated out loud, "That is not happening. You do not order me around, especially not in my own house. And yes, I make plenty of money, but like Dad, I'm going to save it for when I really need it." My mother started snapping her fingers at me, just like she used to when I was a kid, and began shouting, "Stop! I am your mother. You will do as I say because I brought you into this world, and I'm the one in charge here. As far as you're concerned, I am God. That means when I say jump, you say, how high? This house is rightfully mine, and your sister will live here. Consider this your formal eviction, but since I'm gracious, I'll give you 2 weeks to pack up your bags and transfer the deed to me." In the back of my mind, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This couldn't be real, but I quickly grabbed my cell phone and started dialing. My mother shot up from the couch, yelling, "What are you doing?" I calmly replied, "I'm doing what I should have done as soon as this started. I'm calling the cops to get you out of my house." Panic flashed across her face and she lunged at me, swiping at my phone. She managed to knock it out of my hands, and then she tried to stomp on it, but I was quicker and snatched it up before she could. That was the last straw. "If you don't leave, I will force you out myself," I warned her. Without hesitation, my mother slapped me across the face, but I wasn't a kid anymore, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. I slapped her back twice as hard with a backhand that sent her stumbling back onto the couch. She clutched her face, her makeup smeared and her cheek reddening, staring at me in shock. "How dare you?" she screamed. Ignoring her, I resumed dialing on my phone. "If you don't leave right now, I'll have the police come and remove you by force," I said coldly. At that moment, my sister came barreling in between us, holding her arms out as if to protect our mother. "Just do the right thing for once in your life and be a good big brother," she pleaded. "That was it," I snapped. "Oh, really? I'm the bad sibling?" The last I checked, I was the one who had to work for a living since I was a teenager. I was the one who did all the chores in the house while you sat on your butt playing video games or chatting with your friends all day. And let's not forget how you used to steal my hard-earned money to go out shopping after you'd blown through your allowance. You are a complete mooch and a thief. I don't owe you anything. Now both of you, get out of here before I decide to dial this last number," I shouted. My sister's eyes welled up with tears and she started crying like a baby. "Mommy, please make him stop," she whimpered. My mother immediately wrapped her arms around her, kissing her cheeks while shooting me a death glare. Then, as if a light bulb went off in her head, she tried to play smart. "You know," she began, "if you do call the police, I can just tell them that you hit me. And who knows, maybe I'll say that you wanted to do a lot worse to a poor pregnant girl in need. That wouldn't be very good for you, now would it?" I cut her off, raising my hand. "Just stop. If you hadn't noticed, my girlfriend over there has had her phone out, recording this entire time. That means we have recorded evidence of you assaulting me first and openly admitting that you'd lie to the police. I don't think that would be so great for your reputation at your job or for your little Airbnb business, now would it?" If looks could kill, my mother would have blown me up like a tactical nuke, but instead, she quickly deflated, realizing she was cornered. She started dragging my crying sister out by the arm, but my sister, acting like a complete toddler, broke free of our mother's grip and plopped down on my porch step, throwing a tantrum. I gave my mother a pointed look and said, "Do you see now? This is the result of the spoiled way you raised her." My mother glared at me, then turned her attention back to my sister, trying to drag her off the porch steps. But my sister latched onto the porch handrail, wailing, "You promised me!" over and over again. I couldn't help but let out a cackle. Standing at the door, I told them both, "Never come back." My mother flipped me the bird, then returned to her struggle of trying to pry my sister off the porch. It took a few minutes, but eventually my mother managed to get my sister up and off the porch by telling her that I was a cruel and heartless jerk who would go to hell for this. I couldn't help but laugh again. There's also a special place in hell for liars and narcissists who try to manipulate others to get their way, I shot back. My mother clenched her fists, clearly about to say more, but I simply held up my smartphone, still recording, and said, "The clock is ticking, Mom. Get off my property." With one last snooty look, my mother walked my sister to the car and they drove off. I thought that was the end of it. But of course, letting things go has never been something my mother could do. A few days later, I started getting messages from people I knew, friends, acquaintances, and even some relatives. A lot of them were furious with me, while others just had questions about what was going on. When I tried to check Facebook, I found that I couldn't see any of the posts they were referring to because both my mother and sister had blocked me. However, My girlfriend still had access to their profiles since they kept them set to public. We took screenshots of everything and even printed some of it out. Both of their profiles were filled with posts calling me a greedy, heartless jerk who had stolen the house that was meant to be my sister's inheritance by supposedly paying off the lawyer who handled my dad's will. It was a complete and utter lie, and they both knew it. I immediately contacted my lawyer, who had also been my father's lawyer and a trusted family friend. I provided him with copies of all the screenshots from Facebook and the video my girlfriend had recorded the day my mother demanded my house. He suggested we start with a formal cease and desist, but I wanted to take it further. So he drafted a letter and sent it via express mail, ensuring it had to be signed for so that I would know they received it. Not long after, my mother called me in an absolute fury. The same day the letter was delivered, my phone rang, and it was my mother, absolutely livid. I calmly told her that if she and my sister didn't take down all the false social media posts and publicly tell the truth, I would send all the information I had to the entire family, her boss, and even upload the videos we recorded of her online. On top of that, I'd sue her. She immediately called me unreasonable, claiming that everything she did was for my sister's sake. Then she launched into one of her typical lectures, insisting that my sister still needed my house more than I did. I cut her off, bluntly stating that I didn't care what she thought. I made it clear that if she didn't retract everything and tell the truth, I'd make sure her career would be over. There was a pause before she begrudgingly said, "Fine, you win. Keep the stupid house," and then hung up on me. That very evening, all the lying posts disappeared from their profiles. I was unblocked, and my mother posted a half-hearted apology. She claimed she had jumped the gun with everything she said because she thought my sister needed my house more than I did, given that she was broken and pregnant. However, she finally acknowledged that the house was rightfully mine according to my father's will and admitted that she knew this even before he passed away. As for my sister, she also issued an apology, but it was clear she was just parroting everything our mother had said. She claimed she only went along with our mother's ideas and blamed her actions on pregnancy hormones. The replies to their posts poured in for some time, with many people furious with them for trying to take my house. I received a lot of messages from those who had previously believed their lies, offering apologies and admitting they were wrong. But all this really did was reveal to me who had been on their side from the beginning, as they had been so quick to believe her nonsense. Most of the backlash I received came from people on my mother's side of the family, while no one on my father's side believed her lies. They openly voiced their support for me, which was a relief. In the end, my sister and her boyfriend moved in with our mother to save money, but my mother put them in the basement so she could continue renting out the upstairs rooms on Airbnb. My sister wasn't happy about it and started whining on social media that she couldn't live upstairs. I have a feeling that tensions between her and her boyfriend started to rise because after that, all she did was complain online. Meanwhile, my mother barely posted anything, probably embarrassed by the backlash from her failed stunt. If you've made it this far, this is only part 1 of the story. Part 2 gets even more intense and crazy. It'll be up as the next video, so if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe on YouTube with notifications turned on so you don't miss it. And don't forget to hit the thumbs up. Reflecting on everything that happened, the first thing that stood out to me was how brazenly my mother and sister showed up at my house as if it was already theirs. It's clear that my mother had already told my sister it was a done deal, that she was getting the house. For some reason, my sister believed it, either because she's naive enough to think that our mother could somehow take the property away from me and give it to her, or because our mother lied and made up some twisted reasoning to convince her that the house was rightfully hers. My mother's plan was terrible from the start. She essentially thought she could just waltz in and declare that it was time for me to do my brotherly duty by handing over the house, a house that was a generational heirloom, something my father had worked his entire life to build and preserve, so he could pass it on to me. The audacity still baffles me. Wow, I can understand why my sister might be upset about the way things turned out, her only getting the car while I inherited almost everything else. That would definitely be frustrating. But the reality is, no matter how unfair it might seem to her, the distribution of my father's assets was his decision. There's no way to argue against it or change the outcome, though that's exactly what my mother and sister were trying to do. This theme actually comes up a lot in part 2 of the story, which is pretty long. You'll see more of that flawed thinking there as well. As for the incident when my mother and I struck each other, and my girlfriend claimed she had been recording the whole time, I have a feeling she might not have actually been recording at all. She might have just improvised on the spot, playing along and saying, "Yeah, I was recording," to diffuse the situation. When my mother and sister first showed up, my girlfriend and I weren't exactly in defensive mode. We were more confused than anything. But by far, The weirdest part of this whole ordeal was when my mother literally declared, "I am God. That means when I say jump, you say how high. This house is rightfully mine." That was bizarre. Who refers to themselves as God in the middle of an argument, especially when they're trying to convince someone to hand over something that isn't theirs? My mother seemed to think that just because she was my father's last spouse, even though they divorced 10 years ago, she somehow deserved the house. It was a delusional and desperate attempt to get her way. This is a big, complicated story, and I'm curious to know what you would do in this situation. Was I a jerk, or was I justified in standing my ground? Let me know your thoughts and why you think so.